Hi, so in today's video, I'm analyzing where the ball dropped for Zambia, my country, our country, Zambia, with the perspective of how Zambia could be so much better as a country from where it is, with especially the consideration that Zambia, minus the poverty that most people are going through in the country, is definitely up there with all the top most interesting and comfortable countries in the world. A country which has been peaceful for such a long time, but the peace is external or externalized because the poverty is internalized, and the struggle is um, at the emotional level, it's at the family level, it's at the individual level, and still poverty goes on to kill and destroy a lot of people's dreams and ultimately even their lives. And so uh, in today's analysis, my discussion is basically based on the idea that one thing that I can call the ultimate stupidity is going around in circles. If your parents went wrong somewhere, they took a wrong turn, and you grew up with your parents, you saw them, and you also take that wrong turn. That's just the ultimate stupidity, because it means you're not learning from your past. And so we, as the millennial generation of Zambia, can look at the wrong turns that the previous generations of this country made, and turn to the right direction for the generations that are coming forward. The Gen Zers, the Alpha generation within Zambia is going to need us to really correct a number of things, and unfortunately we've become too consumed with being easily whipped up for the older generations agendas, when we should really look at ourselves and how history is going to judge us, and how the generations that are younger than us are going to blame us for not having taken the decisive action. And so, in my analysis of Zambia, I have basically contextualized it in the sense that since independence in 1964, Zambia, having taken on a socialistic or even communistic kind of approach to its governance, initially one of the allow me to correct actually first, the those a more democratic kind of dispensation before the switch into a socialistic and more communistic type of approach. So a 10-year window after independence kind of elapsed before we switched to communistic and more humanistic socialist kind of model. And well, in that period, for me, I think that the board dropped at so many positions, in the sense that, knowing fully that I wasn't there, but from my analysis of the history and my reading of some of Kenneth Kaunda's books and other historical books, Kenneth Kaunda being the first president of Zambia, I found that for that time period, actually, a socialist and more communist type of approach was actually important for Zambia to detach itself from its colonial chains, which were embedded in a more capitalistic sense. And so it was only the nature of Zambia's detachment from the umbilical cord of colonialism, only natural in the sense of the rebellion and the independence struggle for us to have gone in the actual opposite direction of our colonialists, in the sense that we would have judged that actually the capitalism was part of the reason why we were colonized to begin with. But nonetheless, I found that within that time period, something crept in, something really dangerous that up to this point still haunts us, is an entitlement mentality, where during that time with socialism, the socialist model in Zambia, the government seemingly would hand out food, would hand out a number of things that nationalized companies, and people were so dependent on the government to do everything for them, and it reached its climax in the early 1980s until it finally collapsed in 1991, the year I was born. And I find that period's greatest disaster to have been the nourishing of an entitlement mentality. An entitlement mentality for the citizens, an entitlement mentality which was passed on to even the younger generation, where everybody was looking for an easier life. And I think that was one of the greatest weaknesses of the communist type or socialist type or humanistic type of arrangement. But with that said, I think the first government of this country, I think, to me, did what they could with what they knew. I think within the ball game of world economics, they were amateurs. They knew very little, and they were playing in a bigger game. But I found that those guys were brave to take on what they took on, and many of the mistakes that they made that finally led us to a collapsed economy, I think, were more of knowing what you really want. But I think they didn't take the time to really educate themselves with what was really needed for the country at that time. And so we see that they and I tend to do this. I think I make some excuses for older generations for not having known more, but they could have known more. And I sympathize with them and think, well, if we were in their boots, or if I was in their boots, would I have done any better? And it's easy to say a quick yes, I would, but when you look at how we are living in our current time, and how we have not addressed some of the problems that are facing us as a generation, well, then it makes sense to kind of sympathize with guys who actually went a step further and took the bull by its horns, because they did much better than the generations that have come after them. And so yeah, that's my analysis of my simple and basic analysis of a period that runs from 1964 to 1991. Now, 1991 was a year of change to a capitalistic, liberal economy, and I think from that period on, we were on the right track, but with the wrong approach. Similarly, with the previous period of the socialist humanism, I think we were on the wrong track with the wrong approach. But with the capitalism that we adopted, or the liberalization which we adopted, was one on which we were on the right track with the wrong approach. And I found that people at that time faced a lot of suffering, in the sense that the capitalism benefited mostly non-Zambians, so to say. The capital was externalized, and we did not build a local wealth class that really had an attachment to the Zambian person, to the Zambian soil. And so generally a capitalist, an investor, a businessman, and entrepreneur will really look out for where they come from. Chinese investors look out for China, Americans look out for America. And so when we went into capitalism and liberalization of Zambia, we sold all our major companies to corporations that are from other countries. And I don't blame them for buying, because they took what they could, and we should have known better than to do that. And I think it is the biggest ball that has dropped, in the sense that we are really at the mercies of external capital, and not necessarily the internal capital, because we missed it with our approach on liberalization, and it cost us. And so for me, the 2 points at which Zambia's board dropped is with our approach to capitalism, our approach to socialism. Socialism as a whole actually was a board drop, but we had no choice in that game, and I argue that it was necessary. But with our capitalism, the need for a local wealth class cannot be underestimated, because literally our interests as Zambians cannot be addressed until our venture capital is from us, because we're going to have some objectives for our country that are not really aligned with the interests of other countries. And definitely we can't find external venture capital for such, because nobody's going to give you money to compete with them, or to actually do better than their own industries are doing, or do better than their own people are doing. And so whilst external capital is realized and really necessary, I think the most important part we really missed it is we do not have a broad enough base of local capital, local wealth, local wealth class. And so we find ourselves struggling to share a very small cake. And for me, the ball dropped at that very point. And I like to think that with the year we are in, this being 2021, a very tense year for the country in the sense of elections coming up, I've come to realize that, well, the chance for the millennial generation to actually change things is simply slipping away. And one of the major things is that we are a generation out of the entitlement mentality and out of uh, the previous generations and the reign of government that have been in charge of our governance system have been so ready to take hold of the younger generation and slump them into poverty in line with the education systems that have been implemented, in line with the political system that's even the West. We find a lot of the old guard that are in politics ready to throw out money to to the younger generation, to make them hooligans, to make them violent as they scramble for the money in a poor country. They scramble for that money through actually hacking each other for the political benefit of the older generation, and simply, or the highest case of uh, generational injustice. And so we, as a millennial generation in Zambia, I think, have failed to read that game and actually get out of it. And I'm so comfortable with not taking up actions that have to do with um, changing the game, and we seem to be following the same path and literally becoming like the previous generations. And so, like I said at the beginning of my video, it's literally so stupid to go on the wrong turn when your parents had taken the wrong turn, and you don't learn it. You don't learn anything. You don't learn that this is the same wrong turn that my parents took, and you don't learn from the history. And so most of this generation has been made into pawns, puppets, dancers for politicians, and much of it is actually out of lack of self-confidence. The generation, I think, does not really believe it can do